in here, David.
Contessa, this is going to be a big one in the world of Washington politics. Our colleague Chris Cillizza, who writes The Fix over at the Washington Post, Chris Cillizza is reporting the Republican Senator Arlen Specter, who has been in the U.S. Senate since first being elected in 1980. He is a couple of years into his fifth term. Arlen Specter, the Republican, is planning to switch parties, which would give Democrats a filibuster-proof 60 votes in the U.S. Senate, assuming, of course, that there is some resolution of that Senate race in Minnesota. Again, this is a huge, huge political story in Washington in terms of the makeup of the U.S. Senate. Chris Cillizza reporting that Specter, who has been a Republican his entire life, he's been a moderate Republican, but been a crucial one as far as moderate senators trying to achieve some sort of bipartisan consensus. He has decided to switch parties from Republican to Democrat. He has apparently told colleagues, at least some of his supporters of that, and this is now being reported by Chris Cillizza. Again, this is a huge, huge political story in Washington because if you consider that the Democrats right now have the 58 senators, they need 60 senators to cut off debate on any particular issue and have a vote. So, for example, with something like health care, where it looks like it could be close in terms of the number of senators that Democrats are able to sort of pull on board, they still might be a couple of votes short to end debate. But if you now have 60, suppose you get Al Franken in Minnesota, and that's resolved with the Norm Coleman race up there, and it does look like Al Franken's going to win all the court battles. And then you add in Arlen Specter, who suddenly is part of the Democratic caucus, and that changes the dynamics here in Washington in a huge, huge way. Now, Republicans are going to suggest that Arlen Specter's always been something of a thorn in the side to conservatives, that he's had a moderate position on a number of issues, that he has not been a reliable Republican. But nonetheless, when you change the math and Democrats are that close to the 60, and suddenly Arlen Specter is now officially caucusing with the Democrats, that is a very, very big deal. Now, why would Arlen Specter do this? Well, he's up for a re-election in 2010. He is already facing a very tough primary challenge from former Congressman Pat Toomey, who's much more sort of a conservative Republican. So it was expected that Specter would face a very difficult time, perhaps, in the Republican primary. There's also, it appears, there's not a very strong Democratic opposition yet that has formed in terms of running for this seat. So Senator Specter, say that again, Dave? Okay, let's go to, we'll finish the thought here, and that is there's not a strong Democratic sort of opposition yet in this race. So Specter moving to the Democratic side, you would presume that Democrats would be fine to make him the nominee and hope that he can fight and hold on to the seat. But let's get some reaction from Savannah Guthrie, who's at the White House. Again, Savannah, the news just broke in the last 10 minutes. Any immediate reaction from the Obama administration in what is a huge political story?
Well, I'm making a lot of calls and emails, as you can imagine, trying to get the reaction from the White House. If it is true, it would certainly be welcome news. As you've mentioned, Senator Specter, the longtime Republican from Pennsylvania, is a moderate on the Hill, somebody who's certainly his own guy and definitely doesn't necessarily break down along party lines on any particular issue. In fact, has been a thorn in the side of his own party in the past. But I've sent a lot of emails out here at the White House trying to get some confirmation. Certainly, it's something that would be greeted, I think, welcomed by this White House. The more votes, the better. And, of course, the Democrats are so close to that all-important 60-vote threshold. But, of course, as I said, Arlen Specter is his own guy, so even if he were to switch parties, it wouldn't necessarily mean he would always be in line with the Democrats. But there is no question about it. This would be extremely significant in terms of the president's legislative agenda.
And, Savannah, I guess we should also point out that we've sent a lot of emails, and our colleague on Capitol Hill, Mike Vaquera, is also working on this, because usually these things, as Savannah knows, Savannah, these don't really sort of happen in a vacuum, and it's not like the senator decides. There's usually some sort of discussion, usually hypothetical, with somebody like, for example, Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid, as far as what might the Democrats be able to offer, where could they work together. So, Savannah, it would seem that this is not just sort of out of left field completely, right?
Well, it feels that way at this moment, doesn't it? But one would expect that there had been some discussion, certainly with the Senate Majority Leader, perhaps even the White House, to talk about what it is that might be beneficial for the senator to change his parties. I think it does come as quite a surprise, and I'm just looking at my notes here, that we have confirmed from Senator Specter's office that he is going to change parties. He says, I have been comfortable being a Republican. My party has not defined who I am. I have taken each issue one at a time and have exercised independent judgment to do what I thought was best for Pennsylvania and the nation. The statement goes on, but in any event, we have this confirmation now, a rather long statement that we need to digest from Senator Specter, but certainly I think we'll learn in these next few minutes what it is that made him change now, what it is the Democrats may have offered him, why he thinks it may have been beneficial. As you mentioned, he does face potentially a tough re-election campaign in Pennsylvania, and all of this just coming to us as we speak, David.
All right, NBC Savannah Guthrie keeping track of the White House. Savannah, we'll let you get off the air to see if there's any reaction and response to your emails. In the meantime, let's bring in Democratic strategist David Goodfriend and Republican strategist Matt Mackowiak for their sort of initial sort of reaction. And Matt, let's start with you. This is a blow to Republicans, isn't it?
David, it is a surprise. It's not a huge surprise. Specter narrowly won a Republican primary in his last Senate election against Pat Toomey. He won, I think, by 2 points. It was a very narrow race. This time, Specter was down as much as 20 points this early in the cycle. So I think he was facing enormous political pressure back home, and I think he feels that his best chance is to run as a Democrat.
David Goodfriend, I want to read part of Senator Specter's statement because this is intriguing. He says, my change in party affiliation does not mean that I will be a party line voter anymore for the Democrats that I have been for the Republicans. Unlike Senator Jeffords, of course, from Vermont, who switched several years ago, unlike Senator Jeffords' switch, which changed party control, I will not be an automatic 60th vote for cloture. For example, my position on employee free choice card check will not change. Your reaction?
Well, I believe him when he says he's independent, and I think while there'll be a lot of high fives down the hallway for Democrats today, they also should consider that this will be something that moves the caucus more towards the center. I'm sure, as the White House correspondent mentioned earlier, that there was behind closed doors discussions about what the senator might get out of this deal, just as there was, I'm sure, when Senator Lieberman was allowed to join the caucus after having been a McCain supporter. And what that means is there may be positions that the Democratic caucus in the Senate takes as a whole that are designed to court the more moderate members of its own caucus. In other words, this may have as much effect on the Democrats in the Senate as it has on the Republican named Senator Specter.
David, can you think of an issue or two where this really gives Democrats a boost, or explain maybe just in terms of the day-to-day workings of the Senate how this helps?
Well, lately we've been hearing a lot about the 60 votes that would be required to overcome a cloture. You know, to get anything done in the Senate, you typically would need those 60 votes. And then we heard about perhaps the Democrats using a budget process whereby they'd only need 51 votes. What this means is on those things where the 60-vote threshold still remains an obstacle, so most obvious would be climate change and the energy bill. There, this move by Senator Specter would have a huge impact. And of course, then you have to ask yourself, where would Pennsylvania fit in this particular debate? In this case, climate change. Pennsylvania's coal country, western Pennsylvania in particular. And I think it could have quite an effect if the Senate leadership decides to go down the road of requiring a 60-vote margin there on how the climate change bill is crafted in order to make sure they get the 60th vote. You know, health care is a little bit different because we've heard talk of the 51-vote threshold being used there, the budget methodology I described earlier. There, the switch of Senator Specter may not have as much an impact on the final bill because getting to that 60-vote threshold may not be very important. Now, let's not forget, over in Minnesota, you've got Al Franken. If he, too, is seated, as a Democrat, obviously, now you've really got a very changed picture in the Senate where the Pennsylvania/Specter interests line up with the Democratic caucus.
David Goodfriend, Democratic strategist, Matt Mackowiak, Republican strategist. I think we're going to ask you guys to stick around. We're going to take a break, but before we do, a couple of things. We're going to be talking with Iowa Democratic Senator Tom Harkin later this hour to get his reaction. We're also starting to get a better idea as to what drove Senator Specter to make this decision, in part from his own statement that he's just released. He writes, since my election in 1980 as part of the Reagan Big Tent, since since my election in 1980, the Republican Party has moved far to the right. He goes on to say, when I supported the stimulus package in January, I knew that it would not be popular with the Republican Party, but I saw the stimulus as necessary. Since then, I've traveled the state, talked to Republican leaders and office holders and my supporters, and I've carefully examined public opinion. It has become clear to me that the stimulus vote caused a schism which makes our differences irreconcilable. On this state of the record, I am unwilling to have my 29-year Senate record judged by the Pennsylvania Republican primary electorate. I have not represented the Republican Party. I have represented the people of Pennsylvania. A dramatic move today from Senator Arlen Specter. We've got much more on this breaking political story on the other side of this break. You're watching MSNBC, the place for politics.